The mountain man expected a loveless marriage. Then his bride arrived and changed everything. Ethan had always been drawn to the quiet beauty of the forest near the Apache reservation. The tall trees, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind, and the gentle calls of birds made him feel at peace. He was a young man who enjoyed adventure, but he was also careful and thoughtful. People often said that Ethan had a kind heart, and today, his kindness was about to be tested in a way he had never imagined. It was a warm afternoon when he decided to take a walk along one of the less traveled paths of the forest. He loved the feeling of nature surrounding him, the smell of fresh earth, and the sunlight filtering through the branches. As he walked, he noticed a soft cry in the distance. At first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a deer caught in a trap, but the sound was too human, too desperate. His heart beat faster as he moved toward it, his curiosity and concern growing with each step. When he reached a small clearing, he froze. There, lying on the ground, was a young Apache woman. She was pale and her face showed pain and fear. A rattlesnake lay coiled nearby, its warning rattle fading as it slithered into the underbrush. Ethan's mind raced. He had read about snake bites, and he remembered enough from first aid lessons to know that she needed help immediately. Without thinking about his own safety, Ethan rushed to her side. "Stay calm. I'm here to help you," he said softly, trying to steady her trembling hands. Her eyes met his, wide and full of pain but also trust, even in her fear. He could see the bite mark on her leg, swollen and already turning dark around the edges. Time was critical, and he knew he had to act quickly. He carefully searched his backpack and found a small first aid kit he always carried on his walks. With careful hands, he cleaned the wound and applied a makeshift bandage to slow the venom from spreading. He had to keep her calm, so he spoke gently, telling stories about the forest, about animals and the beauty of the land, anything to distract her from the pain. She managed a weak smile, and for a moment the fear in her eyes eased. After stabilizing her as best as he could, Ethan realized she could not walk on her own. He lifted her carefully, feeling the weight of her small frame against his chest. She held on to him tightly, trusting him completely despite knowing he was a stranger. Step by step, he carried her toward the path that led to the village, each movement careful not to worsen her injury. As they walked, Ethan's mind was full of thoughts. He wondered who she was, where her family might be, and if she had anyone waiting for her. He also thought about the stories he had heard about the Apache people, how they respected bravery and courage, and how outsiders were not always welcomed. But he pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, nothing else mattered except getting her to safety. The walk seemed long, but finally, they reached the edge of the village. The sight of the small adobe houses and people going about their day brought a sense of relief. Ethan called out for help, hoping someone would come quickly. Soon, Naomi's older sisters appeared, their expressions a mix of fear and anger. They rushed forward, taking their sister from Ethan's arms and examining her carefully. Their eyes softened when they saw that she was alive and breathing, thanks to his quick thinking, but their protective instincts were strong. Ethan stepped back, giving them space. He tried to explain what had happened, how he had found her in the forest and acted quickly to save her. The sisters listened, their eyes never leaving him. They asked questions about where he had been, what he had done, and if he understood the danger he had faced. Ethan answered honestly, knowing that truth was important if they were to trust him at all. The sisters then turned to Naomi, who was sitting on a small bench, still pale but recovering. She looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She tried to speak, but her voice was weak. Ethan smiled reassuringly, telling her it was okay, that he only wanted to make sure she was safe. She nodded slightly, unable to find words, but her eyes shone with a quiet thankfulness. The older sisters spoke to Ethan after a moment. They told him that saving Naomi's life was brave, but it was not enough for him to be considered worthy in their eyes. In their culture, a man who wished to marry a woman had to prove his courage, his respect for their customs, and his loyalty. Ethan listened carefully, nodding. He did not fully understand all the rules, but he was determined to learn. He had saved her once, and now he wanted to show that he could honor her and her family in the ways that mattered most. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with warm oranges and purples, Ethan stayed with Nayeli and her sisters. He helped her settle into her home, bringing her water and making sure she was comfortable. The sisters watched him closely, seeing the sincerity in his actions. They could tell he was different from other outsiders. He was not just brave, but kind, thoughtful, and patient. That night, as Ethan walked back to his own small cabin, he thought about everything that had happened. He remembered Nayeli's frightened eyes, the way she had clutched his arm when he carried her, and the way her sisters had watched him. He realized that this was only the beginning. Saving her life had brought him into her world, but earning the trust and respect of her family would be a longer journey. He felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, but also a strong determination. He knew that if he wanted to be part of Nayeli's life, he would have to prove himself, not just through bravery, but through respect, patience, and understanding. The forest was quiet as he walked home, and the stars began to appear in the clear night sky. Ethan felt a sense of peace and purpose he had never felt before. Something deep inside him had shifted. He had acted out of instinct and kindness, and now he had a chance to show that those qualities were not just for one moment of courage, but for a lifetime. He smiled to himself, knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult, but also filled with hope and promise. Over the next few days, Ethan continued to visit Nayeli, bringing supplies and helping her regain her strength. He learned small things about her life, her love for the forest, her skills in herbal medicine, and her strong connection to her family and culture. Each day, he became more aware of the responsibility he had taken on, and each day, he felt more determined to prove that his intentions were honorable. Nayeli's sisters observed silently, seeing the way Ethan treated their sister with care and respect. They whispered to each other about his actions, wondering if he truly had the heart and spirit to become part of their family. They set small tests without telling him, noticing how he handled challenges and whether he showed patience and humility. Ethan passed each one without realizing, showing that his courage was matched by his integrity. By the end of the first week, a bond had begun to form, not only between Ethan and Nayeli, but also between him and her sisters. They were cautious, but they could not deny that he was different. He was not seeking glory or recognition. He was simply showing love and respect in every small action. It was clear that his heart was in the right place, and that was the first step toward earning their trust. Ethan's days became filled with small but meaningful acts. Fetching water, helping with chores, learning about the herbs Nayeli used for healing, and even listening to the stories of her ancestors. Every evening, he would reflect on what he had learned and think about the next steps he could take. He knew that the path ahead would be challenging, but he also understood that true love required patience, understanding, and dedication. The experience had changed him, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. After the rescue, Ethan realized that saving Nayeli's life had only been the beginning of a much larger journey. Her sisters had made it clear that bravery alone was not enough to earn their trust or Nayeli's heart. In their culture, a man who wished to marry a woman needed to prove himself worthy in many ways, not just through acts of courage, but also by demonstrating respect for their traditions, patience, and a genuine understanding of their way of life. Ethan accepted this challenge with quiet determination. The following morning, he woke early and prepared himself for the tasks ahead. His first step was to learn more about the Apache people. He had spent time near their reservation before, but he had never truly understood their customs or beliefs. He knew that respect for their culture was essential, not just to gain their approval, but because he genuinely wanted to honor Nayeli and her family. Ethan began by speaking with the elders of the community, asking questions about their traditions, the significance of their ceremonies, and the ways in which they honored nature. At first, some were cautious, unsure if an outsider could be trusted, but Ethan's sincerity shone through. He listened carefully, took notes, and remembered everything he was taught. Every story, every small detail of their customs became a lesson he absorbed with care. Meanwhile, Nayeli's sisters were testing him quietly. They observed his actions, noting whether he was patient, thoughtful, and willing to learn without complaining. One day, they gave him a small but meaningful task. He had to gather food from the forest without disturbing the natural balance. Ethan accepted eagerly. He spent hours walking through the trees, studying the plants and herbs, identifying safe foods, and avoiding anything that could harm the environment. It was harder than he expected. The forest was full of hidden dangers, and he had to stay alert while ensuring he respected the land. Through this process, Ethan began to understand the depth of the Apache connection to nature. He realized that every action had meaning, that every plant, animal, and river was considered sacred. This knowledge changed him. He began to approach life with greater mindfulness, thinking not only of his own needs but of the larger impact of his actions. Nayeli's sisters watched him carefully, impressed by his willingness to adapt and learn. Next came a task that tested his physical courage. Nayeli's sisters took him to a steep canyon near the edge of the reservation. There, they explained that he must climb down carefully to retrieve a small bundle left at the bottom, a test of bravery, balance, and respect for the dangers of nature. Ethan accepted without hesitation. The climb was difficult. Loose rocks shifted under his feet, and a sudden gust of wind made him pause, but he continued carefully, thinking of Nayeli and the trust her sisters were placing in him. When he reached the bottom, he found the bundle, a small collection of herbs and stones used in a traditional blessing. He handled them with reverence, careful not to disturb anything further, and climbed back up with the bundle intact. Each task, each test, brought Ethan closer to understanding the values that Nayeli's family held dear. He was learning patience, humility, and the importance of showing respect through action rather than words. He also began to form a deeper bond with Nayeli herself. She watched his efforts silently, sometimes smiling at the small ways he surprised her, sometimes shaking her head at his clumsy attempts. But beneath her guarded exterior, she admired his determination. He was not doing these tasks for glory or recognition. He was doing them because he cared deeply for her and for her family. One afternoon, Nayeli's sisters presented Ethan with another challenge. He was to spend the night alone near a sacred grove, a place where the Apache held ceremonies to honor their ancestors. The night was meant to test his patience, courage, and respect for their spiritual traditions. Ethan prepared carefully. He built a small, safe shelter, gathered food, and reflected on what he had learned about their customs. As night fell, the forest became quiet and still. He could hear only the soft rustle of leaves and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. The hours stretched long, and Ethan felt the weight of solitude. Fear occasionally crept in, but he reminded himself of the lessons he had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. He meditated quietly, thinking about the trust Nayeli's sisters had placed in him and about the responsibility he carried. Through the night, he kept his thoughts focused on respect, patience, and understanding. By the morning, he had completed the challenge, having spent the night with mindfulness and reverence. When he returned, Nayeli's sisters were waiting. They observed his calm demeanor and asked questions about what he had learned during his time alone. Ethan spoke honestly about his reflections, about the respect he felt for their traditions, and the responsibility he now understood came with loving Nayeli. The sisters nodded, impressed by his thoughtfulness. They could see that his courage was genuine, but more importantly, his heart was aligned with the values they cherished. During this time, Ethan also began to help the community in small but meaningful ways. He assisted elders with chores, helped children learn to read and write, and offered to gather firewood for families. His actions were never boastful. He simply wanted to contribute and show that he could be trusted. Slowly, the villagers began to accept him. They noticed his respect for their culture, his gentle nature, and his willingness to work hard. While they remained cautious, they could see that Ethan's intentions were sincere. Nayeli, meanwhile, was quietly observing. She saw the changes in Ethan, the patience, the humility, and the consistent effort he made to understand her world. She began to feel a sense of admiration and growing affection. But she also knew that love alone was not enough. The approval of her sisters and her family was essential. She began to support him in small ways, offering guidance when needed, and sometimes sharing quiet moments of laughter and conversation. Through these interactions, a bond grew stronger between them, built not just on gratitude, but on mutual respect and understanding. The sisters decided it was time for the next phase of the challenge. They introduced a task that would test Ethan's problem-solving and creativity. He was asked to build a simple structure using natural materials, something that could provide shelter for travelers or serve as a resting place for hunters. Ethan approached the task with care. He studied the materials available, planned his design, and worked diligently, learning from the guidance offered by Nayeli's sisters. The structure was modest but strong, demonstrating his ability to work patiently and thoughtfully, qualities they deeply valued. Throughout these challenges, Ethan faced moments of doubt. He sometimes wondered if he would ever be considered worthy, if his efforts were enough. But each time he felt discouraged, he remembered why he was doing this. Not for recognition, not for approval, but because he genuinely cared for Nayeli and wanted to honor her and her family. That thought gave him strength, allowing him to continue despite fatigue or frustration. By the end of the second week, Ethan had completed several significant tasks. He had learned much about the Apache way of life, demonstrated courage in challenging situations, and shown consistent respect and patience. Nayeli's sisters began to speak to each other in hushed tones, acknowledging that his heart and intentions were genuine. They still had one final challenge in mind, one that would truly test whether Ethan was worthy of their sister's hand. But for now, they allowed him small moments of interaction with Nayeli, letting them grow closer in a safe and respectful way. Ethan's journey during this time was more than just a series of tests. It was a process of transformation. He learned the value of patience, the importance of listening and understanding, and the power of consistent, humble effort. Nayeli's sisters could see that he was changing, not just outwardly, but in his character. He was becoming someone who could honor their traditions, care deeply for their family, and act with integrity in every situation. Nayeli, too, began to feel a quiet sense of trust and hope. She had seen many outsiders come and go, but Ethan was different. He was not only brave but also kind, respectful, and patient. The small moments they shared, helping in the forest, learning traditions together, quiet conversations in the evening, created a foundation for something lasting. She could sense that he was genuinely committed, and that gave her hope for the future. By the end of this part of his journey, Ethan had proven much more than physical courage. He had shown respect for culture, patience in learning, humility in action, and consistent dedication to the well-being of Nayeli and her community. It was clear that the path ahead would still hold challenges, but he had taken significant steps toward earning the trust and respect of Nayeli's family. He had begun to become part of her world, not just as a savior, but as someone willing to understand, honor, and protect it. Ethan now understood that proving himself worthy was not about completing tasks alone. It was about demonstrating values, respect, courage, patience, humility, and love through action. The journey ahead would demand even more, but he was ready. With determination and a growing bond with Nayeli, he faced the future with hope, knowing that true worthiness comes not from a single act of heroism, but from the character one shows consistently over time. Over the following weeks, Ethan's connection with Nayeli and her family grew deeper. Each day presented new lessons, small victories, and gentle challenges that tested not just his courage, but also his patience, understanding, and humility. Nayeli's sisters watched him closely, not with suspicion this time, but with careful observation, wanting to see if the qualities he had shown so far were steady and sincere. Ethan had begun to spend more time with Nayeli herself, under the watchful eyes of her sisters, of course. He discovered her love for the forest, her knowledge of plants and herbs, and her ability to read the signs of the natural world in ways he had never imagined. She could tell from the leaves, the wind, and the behavior of birds what the weather would be, and she knew which plants could heal or soothe pain. Watching her, Ethan was amazed at her skill and intelligence. He admired her quietly, learning from her with humility and genuine interest. Nayeli, in turn, began to notice Ethan's growth as well. His efforts were not just about completing tasks or impressing her family. He truly tried to understand her world and the traditions that shaped it. When she explained a ritual or showed him a way of identifying herbs, he listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and remembered the details. She began to see that his kindness and courage were matched by patience and respect, which mattered even more in her eyes. One morning, Nayeli's sisters gave Ethan a new challenge. They wanted him to assist in a community task, a food preparation and gathering day for the elders of the village. The work required both skill and cooperation, as well as understanding of traditions that dictated how food should be gathered, prepared, and served. Ethan approached the task eagerly. He learned to gather herbs without damaging the plants, select vegetables and roots carefully, and prepare simple dishes according to tradition. While working, Ethan noticed small details that most outsiders would overlook. He observed which foods were sacred, which were used for healing, and which were meant for ceremonies. Nayeli's sisters watched him attentively, impressed by his care and attentiveness. Ethan did not rush or complain. Instead, he worked steadily, showing that he valued their traditions and understood that respect was as important as strength or bravery. Through these shared tasks, Ethan and Nayeli began to develop a silent understanding. They would exchange glances, share quiet smiles, or offer gentle guidance to each other. The trust between them grew slowly but steadily. Nayeli, who had once been wary and reserved, started to feel safe in his presence. She knew that Ethan was not just brave. He was kind, patient, and genuinely interested in her life and her family's way of living. One afternoon, Nayeli's sisters decided it was time for a different kind of test. They asked Ethan to participate in a ceremonial walk through the forest, a path sacred to their people, and used in certain rites of passage. The sisters explained that the walk would teach him about respect, reflection, and observation. Ethan accepted with humility, knowing that every step he took would be a lesson in understanding and reverence. During the walk, Ethan noticed things he had never seen before: the way sunlight touched the leaves, the subtle patterns of birds in flight, the hidden plants with medicinal properties. He learned to walk quietly, to observe rather than disturb, and to honor the spirits of the forest in thought and action. Nayeli guided him gently, pointing out the significance of certain landmarks and the stories behind them. Ethan listened intently, feeling more connected to her world than ever before. By the end of the walk, Ethan felt a deep sense of respect and humility. He realized that courage was not only about facing danger, but also about understanding, honoring, and preserving the life and traditions of others. Nayeli's sisters recognized this shift in him. They could see that he was learning not just to perform tasks, but to internalize the values that were central to their way of life. As the days passed, Ethan continued to help the community in small but meaningful ways. He assisted elders with chores, helped children gather firewood, and carried water to families in need. Every act, no matter how minor, was a demonstration of his character. He was not seeking praise. He simply wanted to show through action that he could be trusted, that he could care for Nayeli, and that he understood the responsibilities that came with being part of her world. Nayeli's sisters gradually allowed more interaction between Ethan and their sister. They would sit together, working on small tasks or walking through the forest, always under careful observation. In these moments, Ethan and Nayeli began to share stories of their lives. Ethan spoke about his childhood, his dreams, and his love for nature. Nayeli shared her experiences growing up in the reservation, her connection to the forest, and the lessons she had learned from her family and elders. Through these conversations, they began to understand each other more deeply, forming a bond built not only on admiration, but on shared values and mutual respect. One evening, Nayeli's sisters presented Ethan with a more personal challenge. They asked him to care for an injured animal they had found, a small fawn with a hurt leg. This task required patience, gentleness, and careful observation. Ethan approached it with dedication, learning how to make the fawn comfortable, feed it, and ensure it felt safe. Over the next few days, he spent hours with the fawn, showing tenderness and responsibility. Nayeli watched him closely, silently impressed by his compassion. This task revealed something important about Ethan to Nayeli and her sisters. His bravery was not only in facing danger, but also in showing kindness to the weak and vulnerable. It was one thing to save a human life, but caring for an innocent animal demonstrated a deeper understanding of responsibility and empathy. Nayeli's sisters whispered to each other, acknowledging that Ethan was not only capable but truly worthy of consideration. Through these weeks of shared experiences, Ethan began to feel a strong sense of belonging. He no longer felt like an outsider. The forest, the village, and the people within it had become part of his world. He began to see that proving himself worthy was not just about completing tasks. It was about consistency, patience, and genuine care. Every small act, every lesson learned, and every demonstration of respect added to the picture of who he truly was. Nayeli, too, was growing more open. She saw Ethan's efforts not as obligations or challenges, but as reflections of his heart. He was not trying to impress her for selfish reasons. He genuinely wanted to honor her life and the values she held dear. This realization brought her a quiet comfort. She began to trust him more fully, sharing small stories, jokes, and moments of laughter. Each interaction strengthened the bond between them, laying the foundation for something lasting. One day, Nayeli's sisters gave Ethan another test, this time focusing on problem-solving and creativity. They asked him to create a simple shelter for travelers or hunters using natural materials. Ethan studied the surroundings carefully, selecting wood, leaves, and stones without disturbing the environment. He built a small, sturdy structure, thoughtful in its design and practical in use. The sisters inspected his work and nodded in approval. It was not the most elaborate shelter, but it showed care, skill, and an understanding of their way of life, qualities far more important than appearance. Throughout these experiences, Ethan also learned about balance between courage and patience, action and reflection, giving and understanding. He began to see that being worthy was not a single moment of heroism, but a way of living. It was about showing integrity in every action, humility in every success, and love in every relationship. These lessons became part of his daily life, guiding him as he continued to earn Nayeli's trust and that of her family. By the end of this period, Ethan had not only completed several challenges, but he had also grown deeply as a person. He understood that proving oneself worthy was about more than physical bravery. It was about empathy, patience, respect, and consistency. Naeli's sisters could see that his heart was sincere, and their initial caution had given way to quiet admiration. Naeli herself felt a growing sense of hope. She had witnessed Ethan's patience, kindness, and respect for her culture. She had seen him face challenges not with arrogance, but with thoughtfulness and humility. She began to feel safe opening her heart, trusting that he could honor not only her life, but also the values that mattered most to her and her family. Ethan now stood on the threshold of a deeper stage in his journey. He had learned to respect her world, to care for others, and to act with humility and thoughtfulness. Naeli's sisters were beginning to recognize that his character matched the courage he had shown during the rescue. The bond between Ethan and Naeli had grown stronger, built not only on admiration and gratitude, but also on shared understanding and mutual respect. The path ahead promised further challenges, but for the first time, Ethan felt ready for them. He had discovered the importance of patience, empathy, and consistent effort. He had learned that true courage and love were expressed not just in moments of heroism, but in the quiet, steady acts of integrity, respect, and care. With these lessons in his heart, he looked forward to the next steps of his journey, knowing that each challenge would bring him closer to earning the trust, respect, and perhaps even the love of Naeli and her family. Ethan had come a long way since the day he first found Naeli. Injured in the forest. Over weeks of learning, helping, and understanding her world, he had grown stronger in character and more aware of the responsibility he carried. Naeli's sisters had begun to trust him, and even Naeli herself had started to open her heart. Yet there was still one final challenge remaining, a trial that would test not only his bravery, but also his wisdom, patience, and understanding of the natural world. The morning was quiet when Naeli's sisters led Ethan to the base of a steep mountain. The sun had just risen, casting a golden light over the trees and rocks. The sisters explained that at the top of the mountain was a sacred place, known only to a few in the community. This place was used in rituals to honor ancestors and nature, and it was considered a site of great spiritual significance. The final trial would require Ethan to reach this place alone, face the challenges of the wilderness, and return safely. Ethan listened carefully, feeling both anticipation and respect. He understood that this was more than a test of physical strength. It was a test of courage, patience, and integrity. He thanked Naeli and her sisters and promised to approach the challenge with care, respect, and determination. Naeli's eyes showed a mixture of worry and hope. She trusted him, but she also knew how unpredictable the mountain could be. The climb began slowly. The path was rocky and steep, with loose stones that threatened to slip under his feet. Ethan took careful steps, balancing each movement while keeping his eyes on the trail ahead. The air grew thinner as he ascended, and the sounds of the forest below became distant. Each step required focus, but Ethan's mind was calm. He remembered all the lessons he had learned, the importance of patience, observation, and respect for nature. Partway up the mountain, he encountered a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine. The wind blew fiercely, and the drop below was dizzying. Ethan's heart pounded, but he steadied himself, thinking of Naeli and the trust her sisters had placed in him. He moved carefully across the ledge, placing his hands on the rock for support and ensuring each step was secure. His determination and focus carried him safely to the other side. Further along the trail, he heard the sound of rushing water. Following the noise, he found a stream cascading down the rocks, forming a small waterfall. The water glistened in the sunlight, and nearby, a young fox lay trapped between rocks, its leg caught and struggling. Ethan's instincts told him to move forward, but he remembered the lessons of compassion and responsibility. He approached the fox slowly, speaking softly, and carefully freed its leg from the rocks. He treated the wound with some herbs he had learned about from Naeli and made a small shelter for the animal to rest. This act of kindness, though not required, was part of what made a person truly worthy. Ethan understood that courage was not only in facing danger himself, but also in protecting and helping those who could not defend themselves. He felt a quiet satisfaction as the fox nuzzled his hand in gratitude before disappearing into the forest. The mountain, the trial, and the forest itself had tested him in ways far beyond physical endurance. They had tested his heart. As he continued upward, the terrain grew more challenging. Jagged rocks and dense underbrush made each step a careful calculation. Ethan used all the skills he had learned, reading the land, moving quietly, and respecting the natural order. He rested briefly in small clearings, drinking water from the streams and observing the patterns of birds and animals around him. He felt a deep connection to the forest, as if it was guiding him, teaching him patience and resilience. Hours passed, and just as fatigue began to set in, Ethan reached the top of the mountain. Before him lay a small plateau, surrounded by ancient stones and symbols of spiritual significance. The wind whispered softly through the trees, and the sun was now high, bathing the place in golden light. Ethan took a moment to breathe, kneeling quietly to show respect for the sacred site. He reflected on his journey, the rescue of Naeli, the lessons from her sisters, the tasks, the nights spent in solitude, and the small acts of kindness and courage that had brought him to this moment. He spent the day at the plateau, observing, reflecting, and meditating. He thought about Naeli and her family, the trust he had earned, and the responsibility he had to honor their traditions. The trial was not over until he returned safely, so he prepared carefully for the descent. He studied the path downward, ensuring he could navigate the rocks and avoid danger. Each step required concentration, and he moved deliberately, trusting both his instincts and the knowledge he had gained. During the descent, the mountain challenged him one last time. A sudden rain shower made the rocks slippery, and a small landslide blocked part of the path. Ethan paused, assessing the situation. He found a safe way around the fallen rocks, using the skills and patience he had cultivated over weeks. With each careful step, he felt his confidence grow, knowing that he had learned to respect the power of nature and to act with wisdom rather than haste. By the time he reached the base of the mountain, the sun was beginning to set. Ethan's clothes were muddy and his muscles ached from the climb, but he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had faced danger, demonstrated courage, and acted with respect and integrity. He had proven that he could handle challenges not only with strength but also with wisdom, compassion, and patience. When he returned to the village, Naeli and her sisters were waiting. Their eyes reflected relief, pride, and curiosity. Ethan recounted the journey honestly, speaking of the challenges, the creatures he had helped, and the lessons he had learned. Naeli's sisters listened carefully, noting the humility and sincerity in his words. They whispered among themselves, their expressions softening as they realized that Ethan's courage was not limited to physical acts, but extended to the way he treated others and honored their traditions. Naeli approached him, her eyes shining with gratitude and admiration. She thanked him quietly, acknowledging the courage, patience, and heart he had shown. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel a deep sense of trust and connection. The bond between them, which had grown slowly over weeks of shared experience, had now reached a point where respect, understanding, and admiration intertwined with affection. The sisters finally spoke. They told Ethan that he had proven himself worthy, not just by completing the trials, but by demonstrating the qualities they valued most: courage, humility, respect, patience, and compassion. They explained that their initial caution was necessary, but his consistent actions had earned their approval. Ethan felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He had not sought recognition, yet the acknowledgement of his character filled him with quiet joy. In the days that followed, the community celebrated his accomplishment in small, meaningful ways. Ethan continued to assist in the village, but now with a deeper sense of belonging. The mountain trial had not only tested his abilities but had transformed him. He had learned the true meaning of courage and respect, the importance of patience and observation, and the value of acting with integrity in all situations. Nayeli and Ethan spent more time together, their conversations deeper and more meaningful. They shared hopes, dreams, and quiet moments of laughter. Their relationship, built on trust, respect, and understanding, had grown stronger. Nayeli's sisters watched, seeing the care and affection in every action and word. They knew that Ethan's journey was complete, not because of a single act of heroism, but because of the consistent character and heart he had shown. As Ethan reflected on his experience, he realized that the trials had been about more than earning Nayeli's hand. They had taught him lessons about life, love, and the importance of respecting others, values, and traditions. He understood that courage was not only in bold actions, but also in patience, empathy, and humility. He felt ready for the next chapter, knowing that his heart, strengthened by these experiences, was prepared to love and honor Nayeli fully. The final trial had not been easy, but it had proven one thing clearly. True worthiness comes from consistent action, respect for others, and a heart guided by integrity. Ethan had faced the mountain, the challenges of the forest, and the lessons of patience and compassion. In doing so, he had earned the trust and admiration of Nayeli, her sisters, and the community. When the sun set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the village, Ethan stood quietly beside Nayeli. They looked at each other with understanding and quiet joy. The trials were over, but their journey together was only beginning. The experiences had brought them closer, shaped their characters, and created a bond rooted in respect, courage, and shared values. Ethan now understood that true love was intertwined with respect, patience, and honor, and he was ready to embrace the future with Nayeli by his side. After weeks of trials, learning, and challenges, Ethan had finally proven himself to Nayeli's sisters and the community. The final trial had tested not only his courage, but also his patience, humility, and respect for nature and their traditions. By the time he returned from the mountain, everyone could see that Ethan's intentions were genuine, and that his character matched the bravery he had shown from the very first day. For the first time, Nayeli and her family could truly see that he was worthy of their trust and respect. The morning after his return, the sisters called Ethan and Nayeli to the edge of the village. The air was filled with anticipation, and the soft sunlight of dawn bathed the surroundings in a warm glow. The elders of the community had gathered quietly, observing from a distance. Nayeli's sisters spoke first, their voices calm but firm. They explained that Ethan had completed all the trials with courage, patience, and care. They acknowledged his efforts to understand and respect their customs, his acts of kindness, and the consistent humility he had shown. With these words, they formally recognized that he was now considered worthy of Nayeli's hand. Ethan felt a wave of relief and quiet joy. He had not performed these tasks for praise or reward, but to honor Nayeli, her family, and their traditions. Now, seeing the recognition in their eyes, he realized that his dedication had not only earned their trust, but also strengthened the bond he shared with Nayeli. She looked at him with a gentle smile, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and growing affection. Over the next few days, preparations for a small, traditional ceremony began. It was not a lavish celebration, but a heartfelt gathering that honored both the community's customs and Ethan's journey. Families and neighbors offered support, helping to prepare food, decorate the gathering space with flowers and handmade ornaments, and arrange the area near the edge of the forest, where nature could be part of the ceremony. Ethan was deeply involved, ensuring that he respected every detail, learning each tradition and gesture from Naomi's sisters and the elders. On the day of the ceremony, the village was filled with quiet excitement. People arrived dressed in traditional attire, carrying small gifts and offerings as symbols of respect and goodwill. Ethan wore simple clothing, clean and neat, his hands slightly rough from the tasks he had undertaken, but his heart full of pride and anticipation. Naomi, radiant and calm, stood beside her sisters, holding herself with the poise and grace of someone proud of her heritage and confident in her choices. The ceremony began with blessings from the elders, acknowledging the spirits of the land, the importance of community, and the bond between Ethan and Naomi. Ethan listened attentively, understanding that this moment was not just about joining with Naomi, but also about embracing the values and traditions that were central to her life. Each word spoken carried meaning, reminding him that love and respect were inseparable, and that to be worthy of Naomi, he must honor her world as much as his own heart. During the ceremony, Ethan presented small offerings as a symbol of his dedication. These included herbs he had learned to identify, small stones from the mountain trail he had conquered, and other items he had gathered with care. Each offering represented not just thoughtfulness, but also the lessons he had learned along the way: patience, humility, courage, and respect for life. Naomi accepted them with grace, her smile reflecting the trust and admiration she had developed for him. The elders spoke to the couple, sharing wisdom about love, partnership, and the importance of working together in life. They emphasized that marriage was not just a union of two people, but a bond that required understanding, cooperation, and care for both family and community. Ethan listened with humility, absorbing every lesson, while Naomi's hands rested lightly in his. They exchanged a quiet look, understanding that their journey had prepared them for this moment, and that the challenges they had faced had strengthened their connection. After the formal part of the ceremony, the community celebrated in a joyful yet respectful manner. Simple music played as children ran and laughed, while families shared food and stories. Ethan and Naomi moved among the villagers, receiving congratulations and warm wishes. The community's acceptance was not just symbolic. It represented a recognition that Ethan had truly earned his place among them through his consistent actions and genuine respect for their culture. In the days following the ceremony, Ethan and Naomi began to establish their life together. They worked side by side, helping the community and each other. Ethan continued to assist with chores, gather food, and participate in village activities, while Naomi shared her knowledge of herbs, traditions, and the forest with him. Each day, their bond grew stronger, built on shared experience, respect, and genuine affection. Ethan also spent time reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the first day he found Naomi injured, the moments of fear and uncertainty, the challenges presented by her sisters, and the lessons learned in the forest and on the mountain. He realized that the journey had changed him profoundly. He had become more patient, observant, and compassionate, understanding that true courage and love required more than bold actions. They required consistent care, respect, and humility. Naomi, too, reflected on their shared experiences. She thought about the fear she had felt when she was bitten by the snake, the gratitude she had felt for Ethan's bravery, and the cautious trust she had developed over the weeks of challenges and shared tasks. She recognized his sincerity, his willingness to learn, and the quiet strength he had shown in both action and character. These reflections deepened her trust and affection, creating a foundation for a lasting partnership. As time passed, the community saw the couple as a symbol of harmony between courage and respect, bravery and humility. Ethan had not only proven his worthiness, but he had also shown that love built on trust, patience, and understanding could overcome cultural and personal barriers. Naeli's sisters, once wary and protective, now smiled openly at their interactions, knowing that the bond they shared was genuine and strong. Ethan and Naeli also began to plan small projects together, such as helping to teach children about the forest, its plants, and the lessons of nature. They shared stories, skills, and experiences, demonstrating the importance of community, cooperation, and respect for tradition. Their partnership became an example for others, showing that dedication, patience, and mutual respect were as important as courage and love. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Ethan and Naeli sat quietly together near the edge of the forest. The sky was painted with soft colors, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. They reflected on their journey, the dangers faced, the lessons learned, the challenges overcome, and the love that had grown steadily through it all. They realized that their story was not just about trials and tests, but about understanding, trust, and the joy of building something meaningful together. In these quiet moments, they made promises to each other, not just about love, but about respect, patience, and support. They pledged to continue learning from one another, to honor each other's values and traditions, and to face life's challenges together. These promises, made quietly but sincerely, became the foundation for their future, ensuring that their bond would grow stronger with each passing day. Ethan also knew that the lessons from the trials and the community would guide him throughout his life. He understood that being worthy of Naeli's love was not a single achievement, but an ongoing responsibility. He had learned that courage was more than facing danger. It was about empathy, integrity, and humility. He had proven himself not only through acts of bravery, but through consistent respect and understanding, qualities that would continue to define him as a partner and member of the community. Naeli felt the same. She recognized that their journey had taught both of them valuable lessons about life, love, and partnership. She felt grateful for Ethan's patience, his willingness to learn, and the genuine care he had shown for her, her family, and her community. Together, they had built a relationship rooted in trust, respect, and shared values, a foundation that would support them through the challenges and joys of life. As months passed, Ethan and Naeli became an integral part of the community. Their story of courage, patience, and mutual respect inspired others. Children learned from their example, seeing that love was not just about affection, but also about care, understanding, and consistent action. Adults recognized that the values Ethan had demonstrated, humility, empathy, and respect, were as important as bravery and skill. Through it all, Ethan and Naeli continued to grow together, facing life's challenges with the lessons they had learned during their journey. They celebrated successes, overcame difficulties, and shared quiet moments of joy and reflection. Their bond, strengthened by trials, respect, and love, became a source of strength for both of them and for the community around them. In the quiet moments when they walked through the forest, worked together in the fields, or sat watching the sunset, they often reflected on how far they had come. Ethan thought back to the day he had found Naeli injured, the fear and uncertainty, and the first steps he had taken to help her. Naeli remembered her initial fear and skepticism, and how gradually, through his consistent actions, trust had grown. These memories reminded them that love was a journey, not a single moment, and that true partnership was built through shared experiences, respect, and care. As they continued their life together, Ethan and Naeli found joy in simple things: the sound of birds in the forest, the smell of herbs in the air, the laughter of children playing nearby, and the quiet satisfaction of helping their community. Their story became one not just of love, but of growth, understanding, and the power of consistent, heartfelt action. Through their journey, they learned that love was strongest when it was rooted in trust, respect, and shared values. They discovered that courage alone was not enough. True strength came from humility, patience, and empathy. and they realized that when two people committed to understanding and honoring each other's world, they could build a life of joy, meaning, and lasting connection. Ethan and Nayeli's story ended not with a single triumph, but with a life full of shared experiences, mutual respect, and deep affection. They had faced challenges, learned important lessons, and emerged stronger together. Their bond, tested and strengthened by trials, became a shining example of love built on courage, respect, and understanding, an inspiration for all who witnessed it.